Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are and wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making this a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, creative content writer here in Chesterfield, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. There are lots of different ways, different things that we do with this podcast, right? Sometimes it's about stories, sometimes it's about information. The one we're going to bring you today is a little bit of both. I am very pleased to welcome Alexa van Aartrijk, who is the manager of the Office on Aging and Disability Services, or maybe it's not the office of, maybe it's just Aging and Disability Services, and I completely messed it up. But Alexa, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to let me come record this in your office here. It's obviously a very busy time with Older Americans Month coming up, which we will talk about here in just a few minutes. Alexa is somebody who I have worked with on a number of different things since I've been with the county. First chance that I've had to have you on the actual podcast. And one of the things I think that's really interesting about what you do is that I think every single person who's listening to this, who is watching this, has someone in their life who these kinds of topics will be important for. And it's probably one of those things we just don't talk enough about. Alexa, first, before we get into the ins and outs of Older Americans Month and all the things that you do and all the different events that are planned for May, I like to always start with a little bit of a conversation about people's backgrounds, right? To kind of give the listener, the viewer, a sense of who they're hearing from, who they're talking to. How is it that you came to be here in Aging and Disability Services? How did you come to Chesterfield? How did you sort of land here?
Sure. Yeah. I got my undergrad in social work at Old Dominion University, and in social work, you either work with children or families or older adults, and I always had an affinity towards older adults. Right. I have a really good relationship with my grandmothers, and I always found myself volunteering at independent living communities, and I didn't realize you could actually get a master's degree in I didn't even know what to call it at the time, old people. And my sister at the time was in Richmond and had a friend getting her master's in gerontology at VCU. Okay. So that's where I found myself in Richmond. Right. And I was with VCU for a few years, and this opportunity as the manager of Aging Disability Services came up, and I couldn't turn it down. So
how long has that been since you've been here?
I came to Chesterfield in the fall of 2021.
Okay, so you've been here a couple of years. The office itself, how long? What's the history of this office? Is this a relatively new piece of the puzzle for the county? Is this something that has been going on for a while? Take me through sort of the history of the office and also the scope of kind of what you guys are up to here.
Sure. Yeah, the office, it's funny because the field of gerontology in general is relatively nascent, even though we're talking about old people, it's a new field, and this office is only about 20 years old. I think in 2003, it was the Committee on the Future found that older adults were the fastest growing population in Chesterfield. So that's how my office came about, and I'm sure my role, it used to be called the senior advocate, and it turned into the manager of Aging and Disability Services a couple years ago. So the scope of work has changed, but right now, primarily what we do is information and referral. So people who have a grandparent or parent in Chesterfield or moving to Chesterfield and has questions about senior services, we try our best to direct them to the best resource possible. Right. And we collaborate with community partners, and we also do outreach. Right. So information referral, partnerships, and outreach primarily.
Now, in terms of, you mentioned sort of the growth of the number of older residents in Chesterfield, and I can imagine that as people are living longer, that this is a very it's a very different thing in 2023 than it would be in 1923, right? Yeah. And the idea because nowadays people are living longer, and sort of you think about even people are working longer into life before they retire and that kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about sort of the realities of the senior population, especially here in Chesterfield, and what those demographics really tell you about what that group is like, how sort of they're making it through. How are things going for older residents in Chesterfield?
Yeah, I liked how you said that they're working, and they're working longer, because I think for a while they were pushed out of employment, and now we need them as our economy needs them, our society needs older workers, and they need to be included at the table. So I like that you said that. Our demographics are around, I think 1 in 4 1 in 4 Chesterfield seniors will be a senior by 2045.
Wow.
So I think it's around 25%.
Okay.
So that's a high number, and it's even more so for the 50 plus community.
Right.
So they're a diverse group for sure. Mm-hmm. We're living longer as a nation,
right.
thanks to modern medicine
right.
and best health practices, et cetera.
Right.
And so we're going to be looking at different systems in Chesterfield that need to expand their knowledge around aging
right.
services and what older people need and what they want, and just it's going to put a lot of pressure on the existing services we have now.
Right.
But it's not all bad.
Yeah.
Seniors contribute a lot to our society,
sure.
especially as volunteers and as workers. So if we're prepared for it, it can be a really exciting, fun new chapter.
Yeah. And you say, if we prepared for it, I was thinking as you were talking, just like if you think about sort of the amount of services that, various different groups sort of need or require, right? And that's from, birth to death, right? The whole spectrum, school age kids, 20-somethings, all the different sort of services, right? That whether it's local government or just a society in general. And I can imagine that as a population is growing significantly, right? As a society is sort of experiencing a larger number of one group, especially now that, the baby boomer generation continues to get older, I can imagine that it does put a real onus on local governments, on agencies, on folks like yourself who work in this to, like you said, prepare. How do you sort of prepare for what is coming down the road for that population to continue to grow? I mean, is it just a sort of expansion of the services? Is it more about information and trying to figure out what are the best services? How would you sort of approach that sort of expansion that is coming? Yeah,
I think it's expanding our knowledge around, because what someone needs at 85 is going to look different than what someone needs at 65. Really and point. Instead of, we love to say 65 plus, right. and then it's so on. Yeah. But that's now almost 40 years for some people. That's a huge chunk. That's almost 50% of their life that we're grouping together. And so breaking those age groups up is important. And as an office, I'm only one person. It's an office on aging sounds so big, but it's just me and a part-time coordinator. So what my small office does is we track calls we get for people calling for information and resources. Right. So I'm trying to get a grip now as a newish manager. I mean, it's almost been 2 years, but getting a grip on how many calls we're getting about what resource or what service. Yeah. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So understanding that so we can report to leadership. So as a county, we can prepare. And then also through our multiple partnerships with things we can get into later, like the Council on Aging and Triad, letting them know what we're seeing so they're aware. And these are people who work for home care agencies, for other healthcare agencies. And
Okay. So in terms of, one of the things I mentioned earlier was, Older Americans Month in May. Now this podcast will come out on May the 3rd, at least as, which is a little bit of time here as we record. I know that there are lots of different events put on by, that are associated with Older Americans Month that are put on by your group. I guess I kind of want to get into a little bit of what's the history of Older Americans Month? Because I feel like until I wrote the press release for it last year was the first time I really understood that it was a thing. Yeah. And then, like I said, having worked with you on some of these things and understanding some of the different events, and then certainly as my mom gets a little older, starting, she's right on the cusp of that sort of expansion we're talking about, right? Talk to me a little bit about sort of the background for Older Americans Month and what kind of things, nationally at least, right, are sort of associated with the month of May.
Yeah, it's a national campaign through the Administration on Community Living, and it really seeks to highlight the importance of older adults to our communities and celebrate older adults. And this year, the theme is specifically geared towards getting flexible in the way we think about what healthy aging looks like, what aging well looks like, and expand what we think that getting older should look like. Right. And we all have this picturesque retirement image in our heads that's, it's perpetuated through our master cultural narrative of aging and retirement in Florida and the villages. And that's not the reality for 99% of most older folks, people. Yeah. They're living in the same house they've lived in for 25 years, or they're downsizing, or they're living near their kids, and they're not all moving to Florida. I mean, my parents just moved to Florida a couple weeks ago, so I can't talk, but yeah. So in Chesterfield, we celebrate Older Americans Month through a couple of events, and we mentioned Senior Day, and that's through Chesterfield Triad. Right. Chesterfield Triad is a partnership with my office, the police, sheriff, fire and EMS, Parks and Rec, and then some local businesses and nonprofits, and then seniors, of course, are invited to the table. And it's all geared around seniors and safety and empowering seniors with information on staying safe in their communities. So that's Chesterfield Triad, and that's the Senior Day, which is annual, always that first Wednesday of May. And then we have our senior prom on May 19th. And
that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
That's at Thomasdale High School. It's for anyone who identifies as an older person who lives in Chesterfield. And that's, I luckily have the help of CCPS with that, because it's at a high school, and they've been doing it for years, and this is actually the first prom in 4 or 5 years.
I was going to say, because the pandemic shut down a lot of these kinds of different events, and a lot of them are, for understandable reasons, right? A little slower to sort of restart certain things in society, and I'm guessing this was one of them. How many folks come to prom?
Apparently over 300 have come in previous years, so I handle the registration for that, and we are around 230, I think, right now, registrants, and I got at least a couple calls a day about getting their parents signed up or themselves signed up. So everyone wants to bring a date, and it's Motown themed. There'll be a band there and food. So I'm really excited. Okay. I have to pick out an outfit, but I'm excited.
I love that I did not, for the record, for anybody listening or watching, I promise you, my reaction there was completely genuine. I had no idea what the number was going to be. That was a lot more than I thought the number was going to be. That's really cool. Yeah. And then you've also got the Senior Law Clinic, right? Tell me a little bit more about that event.
Yeah, it's not a clinic. It's a educational program through the Council on Aging. It's for family caregivers. A legal aid workshop, I think, is what we're calling it. And
clinic workshop.
I know.
Clinic.
Well, we have a senior law clinic outside of that.
Then I definitely
two things. Yeah. So this is really just an educational seminar for caregivers who have questions about life planning documents and estate planning for the person they're caring for.
Gotcha.
And it's a question we get a lot, so we're now creating a whole morning about it.
Right. Now, for those of you who are watching the version of the show, you probably saw that on screen. Make sure for the listeners we give them the date.
That's May 23rd.
May 23rd. And then obviously it kind of culminates. I don't want to say culminates, because I don't know if you would think of it that way. And we've already learned, folks. She will correct me on the spot if I'm wrong. But the Volunteer Hall of Fame, the Senior Volunteer Hall of Fame, even though it's in June, technically speaking, it kind of feels like it's related, to Older Americans Month. And so tell me a little bit more about that event, because I know that's a very big deal for a lot of folks around here.
Yeah, it's a 41-year recognition program through the county. So it's definitely, it's well respected. Yeah. And we have a list of nominees, and 3 are inducted into the Senior Volunteer Hall of Fame by the Board of Supervisors. But we're kind of seeing it this year as a celebration of the end of Older Americans Month, even though it's in June. But timing and space didn't know whether this would work out. Yeah. So it's through that. Is also through the Chesterfield Council on Aging and my office. It's a partnership.
Cool. And then they get to go to is it the June meeting that they get to go to the supervisors? Is that how it works?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where they're technically inducted.
Cool. Yeah. And then obviously, it's not just, I don't want to make it seem like Alexa only works in the month of May, because there's a lot more that goes on through the year. One of those things is in September, National Centenarians Month, or Centenarians Day. I nailed the centenarian part.
It's a long word.
And then hit month instead of day. But September the 22nd, they're also going to be recognized at a Board of Supervisors meeting. And for folks who don't know, tell them a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah, we have, last year we had 96 centenarians in Chesterfield, which is a fun fact. We didn't get all 96 there, but we have 96. We found out that number through the office of the Social Security office.
How much did you really want the 100? Can you imagine if you had 100?
It's too perfect. Yeah, it'd be too good. Maybe this year. We, as you know, we're getting older.
That's
so
true.
In Chesterfield, we might hit that triple digit.
Yep.
So centenarian celebration is, we celebrate them at the Board of Supervisors in September, but we, through the Office of Social Security, we get letters out, and if they would like to be celebrated, they reach out to us, and we get their biography and pictures and fun facts about them, and then we celebrate them in September.
That's cool.
And hopefully in the future that entails like a dinner or something bigger, but with COVID, and it's relatively new. I think this is only our 3rd time doing it.
I think it's pretty early.
Yeah.
Cool. So then in terms of the centenarians. So essentially, like, they can nominate themselves, or I guess they can get somebody, a family member or whoever, to reach out to you. What's the best way for them to sort of get in touch with you? Is it to call, to email? What's your best?
804-768-7878. Give us a call if you know of a centenarian too. We've reached out. If we see a centenarian in the news, we will find a way to reach them and ask them to celebrate. And it's not a nomination. It's like just if you're 100, we're celebrating you, and we have so many veterans as well. Yeah. So they'll be acknowledged during Older Americans Month too from last year. Before
we wrap up, I kind of want to touch on something you said earlier, maybe, talking about sort of the demographics and the and sort of the idea that for a lot of seniors, a lot of folks who are because it's such a bigger group, their needs and sort of understanding kind of what kinds of things would help them at certain points, how we as maybe non-seniors, family members, neighbors, that kind of thing, former coworkers, something like that, how we can sort of help. What are some of the things, maybe some tips, some things to know in the research, in your own sort of day-to-day dealing with folks? What are some of the things you'd like people to know about seniors and sort of what their needs are and what kind of can help them best as they sort of enter this sort of phase of their life?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a loaded question for sure.
I'm good at those.
I think one of the main things that sticks out to me is people are unaware of how flexible and eager to learn and grow that seniors, at least the ones that I've met, which is a lot in my role, are willing to be. And they want to stay engaged. They want to stay active. A lot of them want to still learn how to work, new technology and get involved through computer programs and just stay involved in their community. Right. And they don't want to be pushed out after retirement. Right. It's a whole other chapter after retirement. And I encourage anyone listening, anyone who works in nonprofit or for-profit worlds and works for the county, to keep them at the table, and because their opinions are very valid. It's, like I said, almost 50%. It's going to be 1 in 4 in a couple of years. So to recognize that their input is valid and necessary as we grow
and
older.
In terms of programming and things, I can imagine too that it's just like any other group, right? There are folks, there's activities you want to have, activities for stuff for that group to do. You gotta be mindful of, like, not just we think of like healthcare, but also too, like, there's the mental health component for folks who are getting older, and sort of the sometimes as folks around them maybe are passing away, that loneliness piece that can kind of fit into it. So I can imagine that there's a lot that goes into sort of thinking through how to best care for people who are entering that phase, or who have been in that phase, maybe even if they've been in that phase for a long time. I can imagine there's a lot that goes into that. What would your sort of message be for folks? What's the best thing for us to do to help in those situations? It sounds like inclusion is a big piece. It's
with loneliness.
Yeah, and just in general. I mean, it sounds like just inclusion, including them in various things that maybe cliche wise, you would think other, like, for example, you mentioned technology. I feel like it used to be, the old adage was that, like, older folks didn't want to do this or that on, like, phones or whatever. And now it feels like they're just as tied into it as anybody else. But what are some tips, some things we can do to sort of help them feel included?
Just talking to them, listening to them. Don't talk over them. Be patient. I've found myself getting more and more patient as I've gotten older and as I've worked in this population. Fast isn't always the best way to do something. And just be authentically present with them when they're trying to share something with you, because they have a lot to offer. They're, walk-in libraries, and
absolutely.
And we won't get that back after a certain amount of time. So find yourself with a genuine interest in what older people have to contribute and say in society. And loneliness is a big issue right now. It's it affects everyone at all ages, certainly. But it does affect certain seniors. Loneliness is not a normal part of aging. Depression is not a normal part of aging. And I really encourage anyone who is experiencing loneliness or depression, or knows someone who is, to contact mental health services.
Good deal. Well, Alexa, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Make sure you check us out on social media. On Twitter, it's @Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, you can check out our podcast page. Just search Chesterfield by the Mic. make sure to like that page so you can keep up with us as we go forward. Now, let me tell you about all the ways you can check us out. You can watch us on our YouTube channel as well as on our website, Chesterfield.gov/podcast. An audio-only version of the show is available there, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, and a whole host of other services. You can also watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That's Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. And lastly, you can check out Chesterfield.gov/connect with us. More ways for you to get in touch with us and for us to get in touch with you. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the whole crew from Communications and Media for making this possible. And my thanks to you for joining us today. So, from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care.